Welcome back to Watercolours with Caroline, my lovely painters. This series is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do something called Masterworks, which means that each week we're going to look at one of the great masters of painting, mostly from the Impressionist, Post-Impressionist era, and try and copy one of their works. Now, their works are done in oil paint, and we're going to try and copy it in watercolour. So we have a little bit of a challenge ahead. And we're starting off with Van Gogh, which is one of my favourites. And it's his wheat field with cypresses. He did two of these, and we're going to do his brighter, more airy version. So get your paints ready and a piece of paper, and let's paint together. And I have a couple of these. One that I did in preparation for this lesson, which is this one, and then the one that I did on Wednesday with the live class. So we didn't have as much time to put in as much detail in the 2-hour live class, especially as I had 3 newcomers that needed a lot of help. So you can see, and I kind of really like that this one's a bit more simple and has less detail. I got a lot more yellow in the wheat field. And I put, in the first one, I put a lot more sort of blue and purple in the sky. So it's totally up to you how much detail you do. I liked everybody's with a little bit less detail in the sky. And so we'll see. And also, as I sort of explained in my notes, the one that we see now in the museums, art galleries, he did a couple of these. All of the geranium lake paint that he loved to mix his purples with, or sometimes he used rose madder, has completely faded away. It just fades away and it's just left the blue behind. But when he painted this, he would have had quite lilac mountains and quite a bit of lilac in his clouds. So it's totally up to you whether you want that serene sort of blue look, in which case just use your cobalt blue. Or if you want to put back a little bit of the complementary colors, he would have gone for the yellow and lilac complementary. He did that a lot. You can add a little bit of Quinacridone Rose to your cobalt blue to get a little bit of lilac. So it's up to you. What mood do you want with your painting? He would have loved Quinacridone Rose because he loved geranium violet, which was a really, no, that wasn't the name of it. What was it? Geranium Lake, sorry, Geranium Lake. He loved it. It was a brand new color. It was bright, bright pink like Quinacridone Rose. And he used it a lot because it was new and it was bright pink and he loved it. But he knew that it was going to fade. So he wrote, I have his translated book of his letters to his brother, Theo. And there's lots and lots of detail in here that he wrote about. He wrote every day, I think, to Theo. And he talks about what colors he used. He talks about what colors he'd like Theo to order. And he talks about putting the paint on really thickly because he thought that would stop it from fading too quickly, as unfortunately it didn't. So most of his paintings that are blue, like his bedroom, that is blue and yellow, was actually really strong purple and yellow when he painted it. So you do you. You do what you'd like. So I'm going to get my little drawing out here. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see better. And we're going to start with the sky. And we're just going to wet just down to sort of where the horizon line would be, which is sort of just about there. Because what we want to do is keep the wheat field dry so that you can work on that while the sky is drying. And that way we can get that kind of wet in wet look with the sky, and then we can work on dry paint for the wheat field. Now, if you don't have Cobalt Teal, which is a lovely sort of turquoisey blue, I just get a little bit here on my brush. So I got a piece of paper here. So Cobalt Teal is a beautiful, soft, turquoisey blue, but you may not have that. So if you don't, you can use cerulean just by itself if you want, or you can use cerulean with a tiny bit of yellow Just mixing a little bit of yellow in with mine. And what else did I put in it? I just got to remember what I put with the cerulean to make it a little bit closer, and a little bit of raw sienna. So I added a tiny bit of Azo Yellow, a little bit of raw sienna, just to take the cerulean blue down to a greeny blue color. That's what I'm painting here. Now I've got the tiniest bit of Azo Yellow in it, tiniest bit of raw sienna, but it does make it that more turquoisey blue. But you might just want to go with the cerulean, a nice blue, or if you have something like a cobalt teal, then that is a beautiful color to use. Hard to mix though. It's one of those ones that it's better to buy. Anyway, let's move that out the way. You decide. I'm going to wet my sky with some clean water, a fairly big brush. And again, you decide what size you want to do. These two little demos, I went a little bit smaller. I think they were 6 by 8. But some of the demos I'll be doing will be big. And I got something dirty on my brush there. So I'm tipping mine and it's not wet enough. I've got to get it a bit more shiny. It won't stay wet long enough to get the sky if it's not wet enough. So I'm going to give it another layer. Just tip it and grab my Kleenex, and I just want to clean up my tape a little bit so I don't have a run back from the tape. And then I'm going to get my Cobalt Teal. Right, so I've got my Cobalt Teal, and now we've got a wet sky. You don't want to put really, really wet paint onto the wet sky, otherwise it's going to be all over the place. So I'm not making my Cobalt Teal quite as wet as I would normally make a paint. I'm making it a little bit thicker, not quite so much water. Still has to be able to run off of your brush. And I'm going to put that Cobalt Teal in the places where I see this tealy color, which he probably made with his emerald green and his cobalt blue and his white oil paint. So I'm going to start over here, a little piece here. And my paper's still fairly wet, so I'm going to use a clean brush to just make sure that edge is not too whispery, controlling it a little bit. I'm going to paint right over the dark tree because the dark paint can go right over the top of this sky. I have my number 8 brush in my hand. I might switch to my number 6 just for a little bit more control. I'm going to start with the teal colors, and I've drawn a few lines for the shapes on my paper, but it's actually better if you're a little bit more loose and go with your own brush strokes for the sky. It'll be more energetic, it'll be more yours. It doesn't have to be exactly like his brush strokes. So I want the sort of bubbly top to the clouds here, and there's lots of sort of swirly shapes. Do you know what I mean? I've just done like a swirly sort of sideways S here. He was really, really swirling his brush around when doing this sky to get that swirl of the clouds. So rather than trying to copy him exactly, just aim for those beautiful swirly brush strokes. Take your time. Think about where you're going to put your brush strokes. Use the point of your brush. If you hold your brush up more rather than flat, sometimes I use my brush flat, but I have it up more, the paint's going to run down into the point of your brush. So you barely have to even touch your paper. Like the tip of my brush is hardly touching the paper. And that way you have quite a bit of control over how much paint leaves your brush and gets onto the paper. And again, I'm trying to get that energy, that swirly energy into my brush strokes rather than copying exactly. He would have been much more energetic, but of course he had a piece of canvas with oil paint, so he could be a little bit more energetic than us. And that's one of the challenges in changing this to a watercolor, is we don't have oil paint, we don't have white to mix our colors. We have to use the white of the paper and the water, and that's our challenge. So I think I've got most of the Cobalt Teal areas on there. And now this is where you can make a choice. You can choose to go in with just Cobalt Blue for your next layer, or you can mix your Cobalt Blue with a tiny bit of Quinacridone Rose. I have a little bit of a mixture here to get a lilac color, or use both. Let's mix a little bit of lilac here. I already had some here with, and we're using Cobalt. Cobalt, the Impressionists, Post-Impressionists, they use so much Cobalt. They loved it as a color, and Vincent certainly did. A little bit of rose. And I don't want to mix a violet that's too pink. I just want to pink up that cobalt just a little bit. And I'm going to make a little space at the end here. And at the end, I'm just going to have cobalt. So sometimes I can use just cobalt. Not too strong, because this is a soft sky. And then I also would like to use a little bit of grey in the sky, but not, they would never have mixed black and white to make grey. They didn't use black, most of the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. They just didn't use it. They used colour. So I've got a little bit of cobalt there. I'm going to have a little bit of raw sienna with it. I'm going to make a grey. A little bit of raw sienna, and then a little bit of rose. A little bit more cobalt. And I've just got a kind of a grey, soft grey colour, which is in the violet family. A little bit more cobalt to that. I got a few colours there now that I can play with for the sky. Wash my brush out. Going to go back to my number 6 brush. I don't want to, because my paper's fairly small today. I'll go with the smaller brush, and my paper's starting to dry. So I'm going to go in with my cobalt first of all in the patches that's starting to dry, and put some swirls for the cloud shadows. These are the shadows on the clouds. And again, those swirly, swirly strokes. I'm going to take a little bit of the grey that I just mixed, which is not very grey, remember, it's only a little bit grey. And I'm going to come in with some swirly, swirly greys for, I'm getting a little bit more cobalt on my brush. Taking that in there. This cloud here has a little swirl of grey at the bottom, just a little tiny swirl. Be economical. Be really economical with your brush strokes. I'm going to grab a little bit of that violet, and I want to have a little bit of violet in these clouds, because I know he would have been using some violet in his grey. Back to a little bit of the cobalt here. He's got a funny little thing here. Less is more. If you're feeling a little bit intimidated by this sky, don't do too much. Having a lovely, very light sky and all this foreground is going to be just lovely. So get a little bit more cobalt just for here. Again, get those lovely curved shapes everywhere. And if we use too much color, you can go back at the finish and you can put in some white with some white gouache or Dr. P.H. Martin's white, And there's nothing wrong with that, especially for something like this where he would have put all of the white in last with his oil paint. So that's enough for my sky. That's enough. I don't want to do any more than that. So I'm going to let you catch up with your sky. Here's one of his letters where he has drawn a little picture of his palette and where he would put the colors on the palette, and he wanted Theo to send him replacements for all these colors. The bottom half of your painting should still be dry. If you accidentally wet the whole thing, don't even worry. It will be fine. My sky is starting to dry up. So now we're going to do the wheat field part. And if you want it beautiful and bright, like this one, I used my Azo Yellow and some raw sienna wet in wet for my first layer. Second layer is the burnt sienna, so the dark you see you don't put on right now. This one was mostly raw sienna with just a little bit of Azo Yellow. So decide if you want it a little bit more muted or really nice and bright. I'm kind of liking the bright one, but I'm going to go for something in between the two. I'm going to get on my palette, I'm going to get some raw sienna ready. Or if you don't have raw sienna, yellow ochre is fine. He would probably have used, I haven't seen if he used yellow ochre or not. I think he did. And I'm going to get some Azo Yellow ready. And this is going to be our first layer. You put all the texture and the darks in with a second layer when this is dry. So I've got both colors ready. If you don't have Azo Yellow, use cadmium yellow if you have it. Most of the artists back then used cadmium yellow light, cadmium yellow medium, and cadmium yellow dark to get all their yellows. If you have transparent yellow, that's a good one. Or what's the other one? Can't even remember. Actually, I got some Daniel Smith Indian yellow given me. Never tried it before. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful color. I'm just painting it here. Of course, it's not real Indian yellow. That's illegal now because they used to feed the cows in India mango leaves, and collect the urine to make the Indian yellow. But now, of course, it's made with chemicals. But what a beautiful color that one is. I am sold on Indian yellow, and the new version. Glad someone gave that to me. Anyway, sticking with my Azo Yellow for now. I'm going to start with, on dry paper, completely dry paper, I'm going to start with my raw sienna. Going back to my number 8 round brush. And again, don't forget, all of these brush strokes in this painting undulate. I think because the wheat is undulating in the breeze. Up against the greenery here, it's undulating. So I'm going to just switch to the Azo Yellow, and I'm going to let the two just mix wet and wet. And then I'm going to switch back to the raw sienna, and something in the foreground here. I'm pretty sure this is like a field of maybe cabbages over here. Not totally sure, but that's kind of what it looks like. There's definitely some wildflowers. And to me, this shape, undulating shape in the foreground, it looks like a compost heap to me. And I don't know if that's what it would be, but that's what it looks like. We don't need to worry about what it is. It just undulates here in the foreground, and we'll put the colors in that he put in. I'm switching back to my yellow. Making sure I get this undulating shape against the greenery back here too. And then I'm going to go, I'm going to go around where these cabbages or greenery are in the field here on the edge of the wheat field, because if I put the yellow on and the green over the top is going to be too yellowish. I'm going to put a few little bits of yellow in there, here and there. And then I'm going to go to my much smaller brush, my number 2 brush. I'm going to roll my number 2 brush in the yellow and the raw sienna and get both of them on my brush. And there are some little tiny places in here that I need to fill in. Between the sort of bushes in the foreground and the mountains in the background here is another wheat field. So I just need to pop that in there. And you can kind of see it through the edge of the bushes here. So I'm just putting a little bit in there. It doesn't matter if you get these in the wrong place. It's okay. It doesn't matter at all, because you have to kind of count backwards. What do we got? We have the mountains here, then the green hills, and then right here we have probably a haystack or something. It looks too bumpy for a wheat field, but it's very possibly a haystack. Monet was always painting the haystacks, so they would have lots. If not, it might just be a hill, who knows. And we have coming down here, again in an S sort of undulation, we have the edge of another field and a few bits of yellow in here. I'll pop those in. And I'm just counting past these things here. I've got a little bit of yellow in here. And I think another wheat field back here somewhere. It doesn't really matter if you get them in the right place. This is a very impressionistic painting. The other thing we have on the other side of these cypress trees in the background looks like another field or something back here. I did actually find a photograph of this area to check on. I wasn't sure if these were mountains back here or he had just gone a bit more swirly with the clouds, but they were mountains. Forgotten which ones. I'm putting a few little on these little bushes back here, which he could have put on with oil paint last. I just want to put a few little dabs of yellow on first, because we have to do the reverse of him. Instead of putting the yellow on last, we got to put it on first. And I'm looking, I wish I could go and stand close to his actual painting. That would be so helpful, because it almost looks like he put some yellow on these blue mountains before he painted them, but he might have put it on last. Who knows? There's little specks of yellow in there. And just on this bush here, where this bush is going to be, I think he put all the yellow on first, maybe before he did some of these greens. Anyway, let's get that on. It looks very, I have to adjust my light just a little bit. Mine looks very yellow, but it's not quite that yellow. I'm just adjusting that's a bit better. My light's got a warm and cool on it. So that's our first layer for the wheat field. And we will come back and put more in. Before we do the mountains in the background and the rest of the painting, this will all have to be dried with the hairdryer. So while you're putting your wheat field in and getting your foreground done, I'm just going to mute my microphone and I'm going to make sure this is all dry with my hairdryer. Give me a minute. Definitely dry enough to work on for the next layer. How are we doing? Are you ready for the mountains yet? I have two different ways that I've painted these. In the live lesson, very sort of flat with not much detail, and a little bit of the outlining that Van Gogh was known for. He outlined quite a lot of things with blue usually. And then the ones that I did before that, which have a little bit of lilac and blue in them, and a little bit more subtle. So again, you go for what you would like to see. What I'm going to use is I'm going to use a combination of the two colors I have here, which is I have the Cobalt Blue here, and I have that lilac sort of color here. I'm going to use a small brush. I'm going to use my number 2 brush, especially because the mountains over here are quite small. And I'm going to get a little bit of cobalt on my brush, and then I'm just going to dip it in the lilac color. And I'm going to just use the two colors together on my brush to put these mountains over here. And what you can do is when you have wet paint, just a base color like that, if you want to add a touch of the other color, I'm going to get a little bit more violet on my brush. And while this paint is wet, I can just touch the tip of my brush to that wet paint, and I can put a little bit more violet in there if I want to give it a little bit more color. It will spread into the wet paint, and it will also give it a little bit of an outline already. So I'm going to sort of work that method going across. I'm going to go across with mostly blue, and then I'm going to just add touches of violet as I go across. And sometimes I might want to have a little bit more water with my mix. If the mountains are a little bit lighter, I'm just adding a little bit of water to the blue. There is green. I'm going over where the green field should be just a little bit. So I'm lightening this with water just here. And I'm going to go back into slightly darker color up here. I'm not going to have a definition between the ranges here. I'm going to do that when this is dry. And I'm going to get a little bit of violet on my brush. And then I'm going in here with a little bit of violet. Just touching it in, just to get more than one flat color happening. Now, I couldn't do this in the live class. We had the 3 newcomers who needed a lot of help. I was up out of my chair helping them. There was a lot of chattering and stuff going on, and it's very hard to give this kind of focus direction in that kind of environment. So we just got the color down as best we could. But when I've got a much quieter environment and a captive audience, we can have a little bit more instruction. So what I'm doing too with the bushes that are going to be going up into the mountains right here, which in oil paint you can paint right over the top of the mountain color. But what I'm doing is I'm actually painting into where those bushes will be, so that I have a nice just bright green color when I go in there, and I'm not going to have to paint over with the green and lose the green, because it will have the blue and the purple behind it, which will make it much too dark. And the same thing with the cypress tree. As I'm coming down into the cypress tree here, I'm going to pull my brush back into the tree like that. And it actually come down around here. I've got what I got right in the middle here is a wet paint against dry paint line, so I can fix that really quickly with my damp brush. Just get rid of that, put a little bit more violet up here. And then over on the other side of the cypress tree, this is where I got confused. He sort of painted these mountains almost like they're clouds with that swirly sort of motion. Got mostly in my cobalt for the moment. And a bit of water to lighten it up. And when I put the second layer on, I'll get more of that swirly motion that he has in there. And again, coming into the side of the cypress tree. The cypress tree will be pretty dark, so it should be fairly easy to paint over these. I'm going to add a little bit of violet. And the other place that there is some, I'm going to use more cobalt. The two trees here are two separate trees, a little tree and a bigger tree. And between those two trees, there is a space where you can see the mountain color behind. So I'm going to pop that in. Just kind of here. Looks a bit weird at the moment, but it will be fine when you have all of that dark cypress tree over the top of it. So that's just the first layer. There is going to be some outlining around that when that's dry. And the nice thing is we can work on most of this now on dry paper, on different areas, and everything will be quite dry by the time we come back to working on other things. So pop your mountains in. And then after you've done your mountains, we're going to work on the foreground here, a long way from the wet mountains, and put in some of this vegetation in here, whatever that might be. Nice thing is with these impressionist paintings, it doesn't even matter. We just get some shape and some color in there, and that's good enough. And we're going to have to mix a variety of greens for the vegetation. Now, he would have used a lot of the chromium green and the, I'm trying to remember what the other one was called, but they were very, very similar to Viridian Green and Phthalo Green, like those strong green colors. So you can use Viridian Green or Phthalo Green to mix some of these colors. He wouldn't have used it neat. He would have always mixed it with something. It looks like some of you are ready to do some of the greens. We're going to work on all of these greens in the foreground. So we want a nice bright green for some of these greens here, like almost yellow right here. We're going to mix the yellow and the Phthalo Green or Viridian Green to get some of these. And then you can add a bit of Cobalt Blue to make it more of a bluey green for these. And of course, we're going to have to come back in after that's dry to put in some of these lines. And here, this is almost like the green mixed with a little bit of the raw sienna. And here, on what I think is a compost heap or just a heap of vegetation, that's where he would have used his Naples yellow, probably a creamy yellow. If you have Naples yellow, you can use it, but we can also make that with a little bit of raw sienna. So let's make those colors. I'm going to grab my palette. So first one I want to make is the really bright green. I'm going to get my bright yellow. Any bright yellow that you have is fine. Just needs to be a bright yellow. And I'm going to add a tiny, tiny bit of Phthalo Green to that. Phthalo Green is very, very strong, so you only need a little bit to get that lovely bright green. Now I have cobalt over here, so I'm going to swish my green brush in that cobalt. And again, I'm going to put some bright yellow there. And then I'm going to put some cobalt in that. And that's going to give you just a medium green for vegetation. Just a, You can see the difference. This is really bright yellowy green. It's just a medium green. And then we're going to have something in between. Now, I'm going to use this, don't have to waste any paint. That's the Cobalt Teal. I'm going to add some, oh, it's actually the Cobalt Teal. Look at that with the yellow. It's beautiful too. Might just leave that there. Another green. I'll use the purple. Don't waste anything. They're all good. So I'll have some yellow with the purple, which will make a brownie color. Add a little bit of phthalo green to that. And a little bit of cobalt blue. Oops, got the wrong blue there, doesn't matter. A little bit of cobalt with phthalo green. And a tiny bit more yellow. And I've got that darker green. Did not matter that that purple was in there too. It just helps make your darker green. So I've got 4 different greens. And it's very helpful if you have all those different greens. Here I have raw sienna. And let's pull back a little bit. We want to have a sort of dusty Miller green. See this green bush here? It's almost blue. And we want to make that very, very bluish green. We need a lot of water to make that color. The raw sienna and the cerulean blue. So I've got the cerulean blue in there, a little bit more. It has to be a very blue green. And then water. Lots of it, a little bit more cerulean. You'd be surprised how blue that green needs to be. A little bit more water, and how wet, how watery. A little bit more cerulean. Right, I'm going to test that on my paper. Still quite strong. I still need more water with that, and a little bit more cerulean. A bit more water, tested on my paper. That's as close as I want there. You've got to have it very, very light because we want the contrast between the light and the dark. So I've got a whole bunch of greens that I want to use ready. And they're going to see me through most of the rest of the painting, apart from the dark cypress tree. I'm going to go with my little number 2 brush again, a little bit of control. So I am going to start with my lovely bright yellow and phthalo green one that's almost all yellow. And remember, it doesn't matter if it's too light, because you can go over it with some more green later on if you feel it's too light, but start light. And I can see there is some very, very light vegetation in here. Let's zoom right in again. I zoomed out for the palette mixing. And this is the lightest, brightest one I have here. And everything has, the brush strokes are these rounded, bubbly brush strokes all the time. And I'll do that sort of composty pile in a moment. Now I'm going to move to the vegetation green, which was Cobalt Blue and Azo Yellow. That's the 2 of them. And I'm going to put in some of these, a little bit darker green. Some of these. And again with those bubbly, rounded strokes. I'm going to dip in the darker one that has a bit of the phthalo green in. Some of the darker greens. And I want a little bit more phthalo green in this one. For some of these, I've just added a little bit more phthalo green to the darker one, because some of these are quite bright and vibrant. Just here. And sort of around the edges of some of these. And coming back into some of these, a little bit more of that darker phthalo green mix. And because these are in the foreground, it's great to have them detailed. It's great to have them nice and bright. I've missed one little cabbage out in the middle here. I think that's a phthalo greenish type one. Again, don't worry about your colours mixing wet and wet. That wouldn't have been the same effect in oil, but he is painting fast outdoors, alla prima, wet paint on wet paint, and all we can do is do our best to get something similar in watercolour. I'm just outlining that sort of composty heat place. I'll put a little bit of colour in that later. There are some sort of greens in the wheat field, maybe just green grass growing on the edge. And it's got the stems of the little wildflowers here. Really quite crudely painted, but they're in there. And that's sort of our foreground for the moment. I will come back and put a little bit more on the compost heap later. And we can come back and do a little bit more outlining later too, if you want. Or you can just use it, you leave it as your sort of wet in wet, loose interpretation. I'm just putting a little bit more yellow on mine. The nice thing is, so many of these parts, it obviously painted so fast with so few brush strokes, we don't have to overdo anything. There's some little bushes back here that just like, he's obviously put them in really quickly. I'm going to use the Cobalt Blue and Azo Yellow mix just to put those in as quickly as he did. Add a little bit of the phthalo green one. Pop that in there. Way back here in the background, there is a green field. Again, I'm going to use the one that's the most natural green, which is the Cobalt Blue and the Azo Yellow, for that field in the background back here. It's quite loosely painted. He did come along and outline it a little bit later. Goes up to that bush there and a bit of outline back there. And he's actually stuck in the background here. There's a couple of little hedges way back there. They're like little hedges. I grabbed a little bit of the darker one for that, and I'll suck a little bit of those up. I'm going to grab some just yellow on my brush, just pure yellow on the tip of my little tiny brush, And he's actually got some yellow strokes in this field back here, and I'm just going to put that yellow in, just right on top of my wet green back there. The nice thing about yellow is, and especially that Indian yellow, is when you put it on top of wet paint, even though it's lighter, it does kind of push its way in a little bit, which is quite useful. Now we're going to go and paint all these little bushes in here. Hopefully you've got his original in front of you. We're going with his much lighter one. He painted two of these. One was much darker. I'm going with the much lighter one. So you look at it and just choose between all those colors we've mixed up. Just try and use a variety. There's not a huge variety of greens here, but this one would go in last. This is the same color as the cypress tree, so you can kind of leave that one till all of these are dry. This one has got quite a bit of yellow in it. These are a little bit more that bluey green. This one over here, much darker green. You can go in with the much darker greens later if you want to. This one's a more bluey green. This one's got more yellow in it. This one's the more bluey green for over here. Just go along putting in these little tiny bushes and try and switch back and forth between your greens a little bit. Now see all these little sort of white areas? We can put them in last with a little bit of white gouache or P.H. Martin's white if that's the easiest way to do it with something this small. So you should have a few different greens that you can choose from. And just work your way across, just putting in some. And if you want to get an even darker green, you can add a little bit of ultramarine blue as well. You want to darken it up just a little bit. I see one over here that's quite dark, so I've just added a little bit of ultramarine blue to this one to get it a little darker. And it sort of everything undulates in this painting. So I'm going to take a lighter green now. I'm going into a bit lighter one and just coming wet and wet against that dark one and just sort of pulling my brush strokes in an undulating way across here. And I've left a few little yellow brush strokes just here, and I'm going to go between them with my green. I'm going to dip into a different green now. Just let them, I'm going to mix wet and wet. I'm not going to be probably as precise as his painting because he's got a much bigger painting than I've got, and I can't be quite as precise. I'll put this one in. And put half that in, and then I'm going to grab some yellow to put the other half in. Grab some yellow on my brush. And wet and wet, just let the yellow flow in there. And same with this one here. There's quite a bit of yellow in this one, so I'm going to put some wet yellow on there. And grab some of the darker green on my brush. And just let the two move together, wet and wet. A little bit of darker paint. And this one up here is quite dark. And get a little bit more green for the, little darker green for this side. Just dab that on just a little bit. And then let's get some. Actually, I want some of that really bluey green that we're going to use for the bush over here. I'm grabbing some of that blue green. I'm going to have a bit more blue green just here. And coming up here, swirling in front of this cypress. And over here, it looks pretty light at the moment, but I'm going to be, again, doing a bit of wet and wet with the other greens. And because of the style we're painting, just let the wet and wet happen. Just let it happen. Don't even worry about it. So much can be fixed with a little bit more in the second layer if you don't like it. And some of the wonderful outlining that he does. I'm going to get a little bit of burnt sienna. A bit of burnt sienna with my dark green because this back here is quite dark. That's going to give me quite a dark green. And there's another green in between it, but I'm just going to wait for the dark to dry before I put that in there. Little dark dabs here and there. And here. And I want to do this dark one when I do the cypress tree, but this one here, a brighter green. I'm going to use the nice cobalt with the bright yellow to do this one back here. I might add a little bit of phthalo to that because it's just quite bright, that one back there. And use the point of my brush to have those branches going up, poking up like they do. Sometimes I want to get a little bit of that really bright yellowy green on my brush too. I'm going to put that in here first before I put some of the dark green in. And grab the dark green again. I'm continually getting slightly darker paint on my brush to give it a bit more definition, and it'll get its final definition when I go in with the dark strokes when this is dry. A little bit more here. A little bit of yellow. Down a bit of yellow in there. And I think I can put this little bit of green in here. I think the other one's dry enough. And then the next one to tackle is the really very light green one on the left. I'll just let you catch up with the bushes over here, and then we'll move on to the really light bluey green one over here. Lots and lots of those swirly strokes, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this. We're going to put all of these dark blue strokes in when the first layer is dry, but notice how much he's got in here of raw sienna and probably his Naples yellow. He's not just got his bluey green color in there. He's got a lot of lighter color. So we're going to put a little bit of that in wet. We're going to start with the, remember, very watery, the cerulean blue with a little bit of raw sienna in it, and quite watery. I'm adding a bit more water to mine. It's dried up a little bit. And we're not, again, don't paint all of this. This is going to be a different color back here. We're going to paint this first and then paint that with the brighter green afterwards. So we're going to just do the, bring it over here a little bit. Let's just make sure I got the focus good, and test my paint. So my little number 2 brush, and that's, yeah, that's about the right color. We don't want it too bright. And I'm going to start with those swirly strokes. And remember, all of the darker strokes are going to be put on after this is dry. And then from time to time, before this is too dry, I'm going to get a little bit of raw sienna. And wet in wet, not enough, got to get just a little bit on my brush. Wet in wet, I'm just going to drop in a couple of little touches of raw sienna here and there. I'm going to do some swirly lines here with it, so that I have some wet in wet happening with the bluey green and the raw sienna. And I'm also probably going to put a little bit of a brighter green in some places too. I want to get most of this bluey green in first. If you really study this little bush in his painting, there are so many different colors in it. We can't possibly put all those in, but we'll put a couple. I'll just get a little bit more raw sienna in there, a little bit here, a couple on the top there. Then I'm going to go into a slightly brighter green. But just underneath here, there's a little sort of bit of the bush there. This kind of comes down into the wheat field. A little bit. And get some of the phthalo green, a little bit more phthalo green on my brush. Phthalo green mixed with cobalt, just to take the phthalo green down a little bit. Let me show you what I'm doing here. I've got a little bit of phthalo green and mixing a little bit of cobalt with it, so it's not quite so bright, because they would have mixed it with white and blue as well. I say they, I mean most of the painters around that time. I'm just putting a little bit of that darker color in there before I do the lines. And then I want that to dry a little bit before I put the bright colored bushes behind it. Let's pull back a little bit. Again, that's sort of our first layer. And there are just, get the bluey green colour in the wheat field coming up to that bush. There are some bluey green lines in the wheat field there. Just popping those in. We're going to work on the wheat field next while that bush dries, and then we'll put the background one in. I'll let you get that little one in. And for our wheat field, all of these strokes here, all of these coming along here at a slight angle, they are all meant to be the wheat at the edge of the wheat field. So the wheat stalks all standing up. These undulating lighter parts at the top of the wheat field, that is the heads of the wheat, all kind of swaying in the breeze, making that kind of almost like water, waves on water. And he's just put a lot of undulating strokes in there. And then this, all of this going in the same direction is the stalks of wheat at the edge of the wheat field, and then wildflowers and vegetation here. So we're going to use burnt sienna with a little raw sienna mixed in, and brush strokes first of all going in that direction, and then these undulating brush strokes in the top of the wheat to kind of donate that, you know, the ears of wheat waving in the breeze. So I'm going to mix up my cleaner palette over here. I'm going to mix up some burnt sienna and raw sienna. And if you find that's too bright, I'll mix it up first, and then I'll show you how I can dull that down a little bit if I find it's too bright for what I want to do. I'll mix another one over here. So some burnt sienna and raw sienna. And then if I want to dull one down a little bit, I'm going to take some Cobalt Blue. And I'm going to mix the Cobalt Blue in, and that's going to just make it a little bit duller. If I want some that are not so bright, and I did two different versions. So this one here is the one that's not so bright, and just along here is dulled down with the Cobalt Blue. And then this one is just the burnt sienna and raw sienna. There's nothing else in that one. So what do you want? Do you want it like beautifully bright, or do you want it a little bit subtle? Totally up to you. And I want to use my number 8 brush again. And I'm going to start with the bright one, the burnt sienna and the raw sienna mix. And I'm going to have another brush, my number 6, a wet brush. I got two brushes. One's got paint on, one's wet, because I want to put these strokes in. They're all pretty much like parallel at the edges of the wheat. And sometimes I don't want to have them too linear. I want to put that wet brush in and join them up a little bit so that I don't have too many individual strokes. They don't have to be in a super straight line. They're just, you know, around the edge of the wheat field. They don't all have to come to a perfect edge. And this is my wet brush that I'm just melding them together. And of course, as I make the paper wet, then I'm going to have wetter paper to work with. I'm going to this time go a little bit subtle. I'm getting some of the paint that I mixed with the Cobalt Blue as I come across here. wet brush. Got a little bit over the edge there, doesn't matter. Wet brush, and I can actually pull with just with a wet brush. There's no paint on this brush, it's just wet. Actually pull the paint upwards, just dilute it out a little bit. And I'm actually going to use a smaller brush as I go way over here. Grab my number, what have I got here? My number 2. Again, the sort of browny dull down one, just over here, just slightly smaller strokes with my smaller brush. And then my wet brush. Now, that's the edge of the wheat field. Now we've got to work on the tops. Got to get all of his energetic brush strokes in. Now he does have over here, close to this bush over here, some shadow. So I'm going to put that in first. Over here, and then choppy brush strokes. Choppy, and not too slow, because he would have been working frantically, you know, shoving those strokes down quickly with his brush. And you want to get the same kind of energy into your brush strokes. Under this, where I put the blue in, he's also got some strokes going in that direction. Now, I'm not trying to copy his strokes. I'm trying to get them in a similar direction, but with my energy. So my brush energy, but in a similar, if I just put them in any old direction, they're not going to look like the undulating wheat. And here again, we've got that undulation of brush strokes over here. And I'm dipping in alternately, sometimes just the burnt sienna mix, and sometimes I'm dipping in the blue and burnt sienna mix to get a slightly grayed down version. And I'm just using the point of the brush to get these little strokes in the top of the wheat field. Sometimes it's a short little choppy stroke like this, and sometimes it's more of one of those curled undulating strokes, and sometimes a little bit more of the angled ones. And you just kind of work on it until it feels like enough. Don't completely obliterate your background colors with overdoing this, but you need enough in there that you have that feeling of the wheat waving in the breeze in the afternoon. Why do I say afternoon? Why does it feel like afternoon? Does it feel like afternoon in this painting to you? It does to me, but then that's just me putting my feelings on it. So I'm going back as the edge dries a little bit. I'm going back, just putting a bit more definition in there, a little bit more color. I'm going to grab a little bit of green. He's got a few little green strokes coming up too, probably weeds and grass on the edge of the wheat field. I've got some here. And of course, when this is dry, if you feel like everything's a little bit too pale and not really standing out, he's actually got some shadow on this wheat field back here too. Boy, when you look, there's more to these paintings than you first see. Yeah, once yours is dry, if it seems a little bit too pale, you can mix up a slightly darker brown with a little bit more blue in it, and you can put a little bit more detail in if you want to when it's dry. You need to kind of gauge what it looks like when it's dry. I can see in his quite a few darker brush strokes, quite scratchy, which again I would have to wait till this is a little bit dry to put in. I'm just going to pull back a little bit so you can see what it looks like more from a distance. And also if you want to, and I'm going to put a little bit of this burnt sienna colour in here. He would have done that. He'd have grabbed some paint and put it around different places. I have a little bit more green to put in here too. Now this one's dry. Put a little bit back here. And while you're working on your wheat, I'm going to put those light green bushes behind this these medium green bushes behind this light one. Just using my medium green, any of the lighter greens. And again, my number 2 brush, because they're quite small little brush strokes. This bush behind here, I'm going to come right up to the edge of the light green one to make the shape of it. And what I'm going for again is those choppy, energetic brush strokes and shaping the bush in front carefully with the top of those brush strokes. A bit up here. And I'm going to put a little bit more little bushes over on the side here and give them a little bit more shape. Grab a little bit of darker green on my brush and just add a little bit more dark green. Some places I'm going to outline that as well, so it won't just be as it is, it's going to have some outlining. And we're getting close to the main feature. The main feature is the cypress trees. Definitely the focal point of this painting. And once you get that lovely dark cypress in, that's when you get the wow factor for the painting. If you make your cypress tree too light, it won't have that impact. So we're going to eventually mix up a really good dark green for that cypress. Before we put the cypress in, we're going to do the outlining, so that we don't, because otherwise you're going to smush your hand in the cypress when you're trying to get all the outlining done. Okay, are we nearly ready for the outlining? I'll mix up some of the colours we're going to use. Pretty much what we've been using already, but I've lost most of mine here, so I need to make some more. I'm going to use the Cobalt Blue. for some of them. And then let's pull back a little bit more so you can see my palette. And also the violet color, the Cobalt Blue with the Quinacridone Rose to make it a little bit more violet. And this is going to be useful mixed with the green too, to make a greeny violet for some of the outlining. And then I'm going to have the my Phthalo Green, or you can use Viridian, mixed with Cobalt. And a little bit of the rose. Could have used the Geranium Lake probably, or Rose Madder. And that makes a lovely, really nice dark greeny violet for outlining sort of around the vegetation, which is, his outlining is quite dark. And we can use all of this for the cypress tree when we get to it too. So there's 3 colors there. The mountains are outlined with the gentler colors like the blue or the bluey violet. The little bluey light colored bush is mostly cobalt blue outlining, and then a lot of the vegetation has got the really dark outlining, and then we're going to use this for the cypress tree. So I'm going to use my little tiny 0 brush and start with the blue, just the blue on my brush, and I'm going to outline the mountains first. Now I say outline, let's zoom in a little bit so you can see. I'm not going to just draw a line around everything. It's more like choppy little strokes, and sometimes a darker line and sometimes no line. So it's not so much actual outline everything. It's put some lines in, like for instance under these bushes here, a bit of a line here, a bit of a line here, and then a choppy broken line sort of here. And there's a little bit of line around this bush. And I'm going to the more violet colors now for this bush. Well, we just painted that one. Maybe that's not a good one to do. But anyway, I'll put a couple in. That's fine. So there's a few little choppy brush strokes to outline that one. And then the one in front is definitely more blue. So this one has got some, and they're all curved lines. They're like S's and little curved lines. And they show the direction of all of the branches, and definitely that S shape turns up a lot. And some are just like little lines like this. Got fluff on my brush. Now I'm just using Cobalt Blue at the moment. I'm going to get a little bit of violet on my brush. These ones here, they're a little bit darker. And then the edge here. It's going to be all of these little choppy outlines that are going to give it that Van Gogh look. And put some energy into them. And by that I mean, don't be too careful. Feel the shapes, those sort of S shapes and those round shapes, and get your brush moving with a bit of speed. I'm taking just a little bit of the dark green, put a few more in, and then I'm going to get a little bit of the purple, a few here, and some coming down into the wheat field here. And now I've got the darker green on my brush. I'm coming across here, and there's a few just little tiny strokes here with the darker green. Go back a bit more blue. I'm not washing my brush in between. I'm just letting each sort of time I pick up a bit of paint, it's going to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that on it. I'm kind of just working my way across the painting. A little bit more blue, And the mountains, I'm going back to the blue again, just the blue. I did wash it that time. I washed my brush, so I'm like, okay, right, I just want to get some blue now. And we can put some of the shapes of the foreground mountains in. I've got just water on my brush. I just wanted to get it less blue, and I want some little lines here. A bit more blue. And along here, up here. And again, I'm going to put some of the foreground mountains in. And it's not just a continuous line, it's a choppy line. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit there, a bit coming down. Maybe I'll grab a bit of light blue, a little bit more blue coming down here. Some shadow. And when we get over to this side, he's kind of done the mountains with the swirls of the clouds even here. Same sort of pattern. And it's a little bit more dark under here. So I'm going to put the dark on, wet brush, just a wet brush, and just blend that in a bit more paint here. Just gives it more depth to have a little bit more paint here and there. That's what I was saying about how we did a really flat one in class. It was too busy to focus on all these little details. Pop all those in. So we've got all of those outlines there. Now we've got a few more. I'm going into the purple. Here's what I'm doing. I'll bring my paint over and zoom out so you can see a little bit. So I've got my little number 0 brush going into a little bit of purple, then going into a little bit of green. I want to get a little bit of both on my brush and start putting in some of the outlining in the middle ground here. Quite definite. And again, there's some choppy brush strokes here and there, up here and at the bottom of this bush here, and that sort of undulating brush stroke. Again, a little bit of purple on my brush, a little bit of green, a bit of both colors. And this. And remember, we're going to put that dark bush in as soon as we do the cypress tree. And around here. Some of these little brush strokes come up this side, and then there's some of those little S strokes. And this whole bush back here isn't outlined, it's just got strokes here and there. I'm going to get some of the dark green, the top. Again, don't overdo it or you're going to lose all of your beautiful light greens. Now, just in the foreground here, it's quite dark, just here. Just in one spot there. I'm going between the purple and the dark green. And sometimes if it seems too dark, I'm going to get a wet brush and I'm just going to agitate it in a little bit so it's not so dark. Right, just here I want a little bit more purple on my brush. Lots of brush strokes here. using purple. Of course, the purple on the top of the green is perfect. Gives a great look. Now we have foreground as well to do, and I'm going to use mostly green for that. Wash my brush a bit. Going to get a little bit of yellow with it. It's not quite as... Here's what I'm doing. I'm grabbing a little bit of yellow, and at the edge of my dark green I'm just putting a little bit of yellow to yellow it up just a little bit so it's not quite so dark for the foreground. And I'm going to put some of these edges on these cabbages or whatever they are, lettuces. I think it said this one was September. I don't think this is, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be like cabbage fields, something like that. This was painted exactly pretty much 1 year before he died out in the wheat field. Well, he didn't die in the wheat field, he died in his bedroom 2 days later, but a little bit more dark in here. See how it really starts to pull everything together. You can use any of your greens for putting definition in some of these vegetables, vegetation in the foreground here. Even a little bit of the purple for some of them, if they seem too light. And if anything, I've left a few little white spaces over here, but I'm going to fill some of them up with some of that very, very yellowy green. Just put it right over the top. The one that is phthalo green and bright yellow. Pop that over the top. And there's a couple of places. It's funny, I don't think I ever outline any of my paintings, and I absolutely love doing this with this one. It makes everything kind of come together and have texture and shape. I'm going to have to think about outlining more often, maybe. And the other thing that in the field is those like little flecks of darker brown, and I might take some burnt sienna with a little bit of the Cobalt Blue and make a dark brown, my very tiny zero brush. And he has like these little flecks. He might have even like splattered his brush. These little flecks in the wheat field, and I kind of think that maybe adds to it. He may have even like scraped with his palette knife these little flecks in there. He may have just flicked them in. So I'm definitely going to put a few in. They seem to add to the texture too. Just a few. I have a Naples yellow. It's this one here, which I never use it because it's a colour mixed with white, and I'm not too keen on those kind of colours, but I'm going to use a little bit of that Naples yellow. Apparently it's very nice for skies. If you want it watered down. I'm just going to put it on that, because I'm pretty sure that's what he used. Put it on that heap of whatever that is there. That sort of ill-defined heap of vegetation, just to take the white down from the paper. And because he said he used Naples yellow, so I'm going to put Naples yellow right there. If you don't have Naples yellow, just use a little bit of raw sienna mixed with a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of rose to make a kind of a pinky raw sienna colour. It's just as good. You can mix it with a bit of white gouache if you like. I'll demonstrate that. Here I have a bit of white. I think this is white, P.H. Martin's white. It's almost the same as white gouache. Put some water with it. And I'm going to put a little bit of raw sienna with it. Maybe a little bit more. And I'm going to put a little tiny, tiny bit of Quinacridone Rose with it. And that gives me a kind of a warm colour, which is almost the same as my Naples yellow. Because they do mix white with the paint to make Naples yellow. So that's my mix that I just made. And beside it, I will paint the Naples yellow. So the Naples yellow I have in my palette is maybe a little bit more raw sienna-ish. So I'll add a little bit more raw sienna to my mix I just made. And try that. Well, there you go. See, just a little bit more raw sienna to my mix. And I have an exact, absolutely exact copy of Naples yellow. So that is a white, either a white watercolor, a white gouache, or P.H. Martin's white, mostly raw sienna, and the tiniest bit of rose just to warm it up a little bit. And you've got Naples yellow. And apparently some watercolorists like to use it in their sky or for sand, but really, really watered down. I'm just going to water. Oh, my paint water is getting pretty dirty. It's going to grab a bit of that Naples yellow and just put it on watered down paper. Kind of nice. I think it just gives that kind of a warm glow to the sky. Anyway. What doing these master paintings has helped me do is do things I've never tried before, like outlining things, using white, using colours I've never tried before. It's a lovely way to experiment. And you know it works because it's a masterpiece, so it's bound to work. Right, we're nearly at 3, so let's do the cypress tree. Let's get the nice dark green for the cypress tree. I'm going to go back to my mix I've got over here, this dark green mix I made for outlining. So that is, and let's mix some more. So it's the Phthalo Green and some Azo Yellow. Makeup. And then Ultramarine Blue, nice strong blue. And then you can either add some rose or you can add some burnt sienna. I like to add burnt sienna. It just gets some nice darkness into it. I'm going to add a little bit of rose too, because you get that kind of violet happening with the green. Go back a little bit more phthalo. A little bit more yellow. So I just go back and forth until I get something nice and dark. A little bit more blue. There we go. And you can always put a second layer. There's quite a lot of outlining on the cypress trees too. So I don't want a brush that's too big. I'm going to use my number 4 and my number 2, as I've got a fairly small bit of paper. My number 2 is going to be my starter brush, because I'm going to start at the top, right at the top of the tree. There's just like a few little brush strokes to make the top of the tree, and then lots of staccato sort of little brush strokes, and a lot of the darkness is on the outside of the tree. So what you can do is you can get some of your lighter green, yellowy green maybe, and you can just put that in the middle of the tree if you want, some S shapes, and your darker brush strokes will come in and hit those get it so you can see. I'm going back to my number 2 brush, my very dark paint. I just put that light in the center so that as I come in with those little brush strokes, it's going to hit that lighter paint that's in the center. And you can always put some darker brush strokes on later. And don't forget, there's 2 trees here. There's this big tree. Keep dipping in your paint so you don't run out of color. Remember that these brush strokes of the tree are, again, still those kind of S shapes, those curvy shapes. And I've got my other brush with a little bit of light green on. I'm going to put that in here. That light green's drying up. Wet it up a little bit. Switch brushes back to my dark green. And when you get close to the base of the tree, you have to be careful because you want to go around this light vegetation that's at the base and make sure that you outline it very, very carefully. And this is where I do want to be careful with the composition. This dark comes around this bush and then out. And then there's that space. There's a space between the 2 trees here, just here. And I've kind of lost the space near the top. I did leave it and then I kind of lost it. And the top of the tree wiggles in that S bend. And the middle of the tree is light, so I'm going to get a little bit more of that light paint. As for the middle, and as I come towards it, it will all blend in. And again, at the bottom here, there's that S curve. And as you come down behind these bushes or cabbages or whatever these are, you have to be careful around the tops of them, get the right shape. Every so often I'm dipping back in my dark paint. There's probably even 3 trees here. There's probably even one there. Got that gap too big. I've got to close it up a little bit. And I've got the dark green and the purple on my brush, dipping into both just to connect some of these lines with that colour. And put a little bit more dark in. And the other thing we don't want to forget is this bush over here is quite dark. You've got to get that in with the same dark green you've got for the cypress trees. And connect a little bit of the linear work with the same green. Because I'm going to pull back because you're very close now. What's happening here is you're coming in here. I'm going to get this green and purple. You're coming in here around these bushes and up this tree, and then across here with some dark, all matching dark across here to this bush, across here, a few lines here, a few lines here, and a few here, and it's taking you across the painting. Now what I want to do is, this little bush over here is too dark. I'm going to take my washed, dried, thirsty brush, and I'm going to just pick up a little bit on one side of that so it's not quite so dark. Just take up a little bit of the colour. It needs to be fairly dark, but not as dark as I made it. Take up a little bit there. There's also a little bit of outlining here. And see what I mean when you get that dark tree and it just really elevates the whole composition. Now, when this is dry, you can use the dark purple mixed with the green to put a few more of those lovely swirly brush strokes in. It's the green and the purple mixed, and you can get some of those swirly brush strokes. At the moment it will dry a bit lighter, so you won't see them. And there's only 2 things to do now, and that's to put a few poppies in the field and some wildflowers, and any white that you may have lost in the clouds, or even maybe you want a bit more definition in the clouds. I don't know. I know on my first one I needed to put some more white back in the clouds, and I got my white gouache and I added a bit more white. I'm better at it now. This is my 3rd one, so I'm a little bit better at leaving the white in the clouds. But if you haven't, clean water. It's got to be very, very clean water with your white. If you haven't left enough white swirl in your clouds, really clean water, your white gouache or Dr. P.H. Martin's white. I'm going to add a little bit more to that because I want some for the wildflowers. Just add a little bit more. So if you felt that you wanted a bit more in the clouds, well, just put it in there. Swirly motions with the white paint. And you can get some of that movement, beautiful movement in the clouds that he has going on. Especially these ones here behind the mountains really swirl up. This one swirls around, and this one really, really swirls up. So you can use your white, you know, to pick up some of that. The one thing we're going to use it for, I know I'm rushing ahead a little bit now to get this done. I'm going to zoom in again. There are some little wildflowers in the field here. They are just little blotches, few here, a few here. We're going to put some poppies into a few little streaks in this pile here, maybe a few streaks in your vegetation here. There's a little bit of white. I'm just putting these little wildflowers in, just little blotches. And if at any point you've lost any light anywhere, if you want a little bit more light in these swirly bushes here, if you want a few little, let's see, just a little bit of your white gouache, it's fine. I'm just washing my brush out. Now, for the poppies, he would have probably used his vermilion, but you can use cadmium red. I used cadmium red in my first painting. I have some lovely vermilion here, so I'm going to use vermilion in this painting. We can just look at the difference now. Bring my vermilion over. Here's my vermilion. Is that it? No, it's not. Sorry, not my vermilion. This one is. This one here. So I'm just going to get it like this on my brush. Got my little zero brush and I'm getting some nice strong vermilion on it. Not going to put it in my palette or anything. I have it pretty neat, very little liquid on my brush because I want it nice and strong. And so I'm going to put those little blotchy poppy shapes that he has in the field. A few here. If you look closely, he's got a few dotted here and there. He's got some here. They're literally just dots, little dots. Got some here, blotch, blotch, blotch. And he's actually got a couple over here. I think there's a couple in here. Checking to see if there's anywhere else. I think that's all there is. Don't fuss with the shape of them. Literally do not fuss. It's nice to have a couple over here too. And those final little wildflowers in the foreground are your finishing touches. So gorgeous to have that little touch of red with the dark green. Let's pull back. And these ones are cadmium red. There's not a lot of difference, but if you want to be accurate, his were vermilion. Let's look at it on actual paper. See if we can see the difference. I've got a clean brush. So this is vermilion, very, very, very orangey red. And then this one I'm going to put on next. This is cadmium red. So you can see the cadmium red is just slightly more pinky color than the vermilion. And what other reds do I have? Well, I have a Pyrrole red. And that's very, very similar to cadmium. So any of those ones, any bright red is going to work to put a few poppies in the field. I'll clean all my brushes and let's pull back a little bit and see what we've got. We have a lovely Van Gogh wheat field with cypresses, with maybe a little bit more of the colour put back in that he would have had in there when he painted it. How did it go? How was your wheat field? I really enjoyed doing this one so much. I loved painting in the style of someone else and I learnt a lot. So let's join each other again next week, and next week we'll do Georgia O'Keeffe, one of her beautiful flower paintings. See you then. Bye for now.